I hope some of you get the opportunity to see the artwork that they have out here in their beautiful new library, their library which is supported by you. I've come here tonight to talk about pop-up books. And what I like to do when I travel to talk about pop-up books is to show slides, because you want to see what's going on. I mean, I'm standing up here and you can see the books out there, but what happens in between? What I like to do at the beginning of my presentation is give a little bit, just give a very short history on pop-up and movable books. And the reason why I do that is most people think that pop-up books tend to have just been around for like 20 years or 30 years, but that history goes so much farther. So those of you who are educators, I want you to be able to go back and share that information with other educators or with your classrooms. So, a brief history of pop-up books. The earliest pop-ups are movables. Pop-ups are traditionally called movables, were not meant for the enjoyment of young readers. The first pop-up books were not for children. This movable from 1536, this is from 1536, is called a movable, and was used to plot the astronomical positions of heavenly bodies. It's made up of several paper wheels. These are paper wheels right here, and they spin around, and you can spin these instruments around on the inside. Bound together in the center with a piece of string. There's a little piece of string right there. Books with movables were extremely expensive and were usually only found in the libraries of royalties or scientists. So you could use this like to calculate things, like calculate distance or calculate times or different things in space. It was really a teaching tool for scholars. Other movables, like this one from 1647, were made to represent the heavenly bodies themselves and were sometimes used to tell one's future. The movables were also the first cut out and assemble books. The volume was sold, the whole book was sold to the customer completely unassembled. The pieces would have to be cut out and carefully aligned onto the page by the owner, run through with a piece of string in order to get the movables to work. So you had to make this whole book and put all the pieces together yourself. More elaborate movables would be watercolored to add more life to the page. This is the first use of illustration in children's books using watercolors. The movables, since they were so expensive, the owners of these books, since they were paying so much money, wanted them to be as beautiful as possible, so they would hire illustrators, and illustrators would come and watercolor all the beautiful pieces, then cut them out and put them into the book. This actual book here, this Appianus movable, is in the Smithsonian Institution. Movables also appeared in books to help doctors understand the workings of the human body through the use of flaps, which revealed organs underneath. This title is from 1660, because you have to remember at that time, medical students were not allowed to dissect bodies. They couldn't look inside of a body to understand how it would work. So these books had flaps. You could peel the flap back and see what the inside of a body looked like, and it was especially helpful for young medical students to understand about women being pregnant, because they could see how a baby would be positioned inside the body. But in 1779, one of the first actual pop-ups, a real pop-up, appeared in a complete treatise on perspective. A small string is pulled, you pull a string right here, and a paper box erects that contains more strings inside to teach art students about perspective. So this was also a teaching tool to help students understand how things worked. But the Harlequinator turn-up book was the first type of movable book made exclusively for young readers. Each page is divided in half with a flap that either flips up or flips down to help move the story along. The Woodman's Hut from 1805, this is from 1805, follows a basic storyline. English boy meets girl, loses girl, goes to prison, and the whole affair ends in an engulfing forest fire. Appropriate entertainment for children. Humor and tab mechanisms finally appeared with Mimical Ladies and Gentlemen in 1825. This title is made up of a traditional book-like slipcase, which holds a small series of cards. Each hand-colored card shows a caricature of a person and has a simple tab located at the bottom. So there's a little tab located at the bottom of this hand-colored card. By moving the tab back and forth, the figure's mouth moves, in this case creating the appearance of snoring. Let's see. Oh, yes. Oh. Ah. This is what they did when they sat around the table in the early 1800s. Oh, it's so humorous. Until the 1840s, movable book publishing had been sporadic at best until one firm, Dean & Son of London, devoted themselves exclusively to the genre. They quickly came to dominate the market with simple endeavors like Dame Wonder's transformation shown here. Each page contains a cutout hole through which one can view plain Miss Rose in various costumes from around the world. The peep show also gained popularity in the early days of movables. The idea was based on old traveling peep shows, which created elaborate constructions depicting famous scenes or events and charging patrons a penny to stare into the hole to view it. So you'd look into this little hole right here, and you'd be able to see all this three-dimensional scene all the way going to the back. This sample's from 1850 and extends to about 1 foot in length. The highly popular drawing room dress books appeared in the 1860s. This is one of my favorite titles, which I don't have a copy of. The characters were fitted with actual cotton and silk clothing, which stood out as the pages were turned. The title shown here is Beauty and the Beast, but might be more appropriately called Beauty and the Rat, based on the depiction of the monstrous hero. Considered by many to be the first true movable book, Dean & Son's new scenic book Cinderella used many layers and lift-up flaps to produce a full three-dimensional scene. Each layer was attached to the next with a piece of ribbon. There's a little piece of ribbon right here, and it goes to this part of the scene, and then it goes behind it to the piece of paper on the back. When you lift the furthest flap, the ribbon goes all the way out the back side, this whole scene would stand up. When the ribbon was lifted, yes, everything stood up from the front. Cinderella is from 1860. Foreign editions of classic tales began to move beyond the English world. This is the French version of Robinson Crusoe, also from 1860. German Ernest Nister produced some of the most beautiful movable books ever between the years of 1891 and 1900. Nister's company was based in Nuremberg, which at the time was the heart of the toy business. One of his greatest and most creative inventions was the development of revolving mechanisms. The transformation was produced by revolving one paper disc interleaved with another, and you would turn a small tab. So down here by the little kitty, there's a tab, and you start to turn the tab up this way, and it goes all the way up to the top, and you bring it all the way down to the bottom to reveal a completely new scene. But not all beautiful things were being created overseas or by familiar names. This 1884 title illustrating the 4 seasons, complete with pull tabs, was created by the International News Company of New York as an advertising promotion. This is a huge pop-up book. It's very three-dimensional, but what I love about it so much is that each one of these pop-ups has a pull tab down here. So when you pull the tab, you can rock a baby in springtime. Oh, adorable. Or share a secret with a friend. And just look at that color. That's what children's books publishing used to be like in the late 1800s. Beautiful, beautiful colors and beautiful, beautiful books. For the title of most elaborate and innovative pull tab creator, the honor must go to Lothar Meggendorfer. A German and contemporary of Nister, Meggendorfer also gave his books something not seen very often in movables. And I'll try to do it quick. Oh, I love this book. It's about a boy painter and his manservant and their wacky adventures. And Meggendorfer engineered a tremendous amount of movement from a single pull tab. So with just one pull of a tab, oh, this is great. So you pull the tab, and he starts to beat off the eagle. Ah! By using dozens of metal rivets. There's these little metal rivets in each page, all these metal rivets, so everything's hinged and everything can move. Let's see. But most importantly, Meggendorfer was not afraid to let silly people do silly things. Ah! And there you can see the rivets. There's these little metal rivets to hinge everything. So very, very fun, humorous artwork in children's books. Not so much that sweet saccharine stuff, but real humor. A reproduction of some of Meggendorfer's work was created about 100 years after the original. So this is from the late 1900s. And this reproduction book contains at the back, you turn to the last page, they're all reproductions. You flip the last page over, and there's a little plastic window, and you can pull the tab, and you can appreciate Meggendorfer's work to see how complex the structures actually were. But surely one of the greatest turn-of-the-century titles moved in a completely different way. Running alongside the speaking picture book are 9 ivory knobs. There's these little ivory knobs here, each corresponding with a picture that when pulled, you pull the knob, and a sound is produced. A donkey, birds, a cow by means of a miniature paper bellows inside the book. The American version of this title was produced by the New York toy store FAO Schwarz. So there's these little screened areas right here that allow the sound to come through from the inside. So this is a copy of my book, and me being Robert Sabuda and being really curious, I went over to my friend's house who also had a copy and said, gee, I wonder what this looks like on the inside. So he took it apart. And I wanted to see what it looked like. And I can put it back together. I know how it works. But I loved when he opened it up and we could see all the little bellows and the little things that the sound comes through. Wind rushes through all these little points and makes the sound. I think you even have a close-up. Yeah, a little bit of a closer view of some of the paper bellows. And this, we think my books are complicated. I'm going to talk about how the books are built and put together in a minute. This is wood. This is made out of wood, and this is wire, and this is probably asbestos and lead and all these other things in here. But who cares? It's a fabulous book. During World War I, relations between the German manufacturers and the London and American markets ceased to exist. It was World War I. But a few titles were still put out, even if they were for a much different market. This is Phillips' popular Mannequin from 1914, and it's an anatomical study which allows the reader to peel back flaps that reveal various organs and parts of the body, all the way down to the minutest detail, a hark back to the early 17th century movables. I recently just got Mrs. Phillips' Mannequin, the female version of this, and I'm going to go back here, and I want you to notice that, let's see, Mr. Phillips is missing a very important part of his anatomy. So I didn't even realize that until I got Mrs. Phillips, and I was trying to figure out what was going to happen with that, and I was, just to show you what time was like during World War I, when I got the Mrs. Phillips Mannequin, I opened up the book expecting to see something similar, but to prepare my eyes to be shocked even further, there was a piece of white paper totally covering her naked body, except for her head and her toes, to prepare me for the fact that I was going to see a naked woman when I turned the page. Crazy. And this was probably used for medical students, although I don't know how they could have used it so incomplete. Okay, Boccanos. In 1929, S. Lewis Gerard of London began to produce a remarkable series of annuals for young people titled Boccano Stories. Each title contained various stories and at least 5 double-page pop-up spreads. Since the pops could be viewed from a full 360-degree angle, you can turn the whole book around and see the pop-up properly from all sides. Gerard's Boccanos are considered the first true pop-up books. Just amazing pop-ups. The series of 50 or so books continued right up through World War II until 1949. Religion even found its way into movable books with the children's Haggadah from 1933. With a simple pull of a tab at the bottom, those annoying Egyptians disappear from sight. That's so easy, right? That's right. Just pull the tab, and bye-bye, they're gone. The Jolly Jump-Ups began in 1939 and opened to be read parallel to the spine. This immensely popular series presented an idealized view of the American family with nothing but time on their hands before the Second World War. But in 1959, a Czechoslovakian toy maker named Wojciech Kubasta is considered the 20th century truly master of pop-up books, Kubasta, appeared on the scene. Like the Jolly Jump-Up series, his books opened to be read parallel to the spine. One of the first pop-up books I ever had was by Kubasta, Cinderella. Kubasta's magic lay in the fact that with just a single sheet of paper, one piece of paper with no extra pieces glued on, he could create an amazingly three-dimensional pop-up, while appearing to make the task effortless. Sometimes he included a very simple but highly effective pull tab, as can be seen here with the prince leaning through Sleeping Beauty's window for a kiss. Oh, isn't that great? Oh, so simple but so effective. Kubash's fairy tale series was quite popular and ran the gamut of classic titles, including The Brave Tin Soldier, which presents us with the deliciously ingenious demise of the story's hero by means of a pull tab. Until his death in 1992, it is said by Ardia, Kubash's publisher, that the artist's work was produced in 30 million copies of books and translated into 37 foreign languages. Science fiction became reality when astronauts walked on the moon in 1969. This was also one of my favorite books when I was a boy. This pop-up book from Hallmark, Hallmark Cards produced pop-up books from the late 60s to the early 1980s, came complete with the command module balanced on a wire. There's this wire and there's this little, I thought that was just the coolest thing. And also has a complete lunar module. But what many consider to be the revival of the genre at full steam occurred in 1979, and most librarians will know this as well, with the publication of Jan Pankowski's Haunted House. Haunted House is a big, bold, kooky book that wasn't worried about being cute or sweet. It even contains delightfully innovative engineering, such as the sound effect found on the last spread of a saw noisily trying to cut itself out of a box, almost 100 years after the miniature bellows of the speaking picture book. Over 2 million copies of Haunted House have been sold, and it's still in print today. Pankowski followed up with Robots in 1981 with even more outrageous images, also a classic pop-up book. Engineering, laughs, and what must be the best pull tab ever. This is the best pull tab ever, and I'm going to do it quick so you can kind of get an idea. A weightlifting robot father hoists a dumbbell over his head, only to discover his pants are falling down, and quickly brings down the weight to cover his striped boxers. That's awesome, all from one pull tab, awesome. Celebrity entered the pop-up world in 1980 with the one and only king of rock and roll. And in 1982, another king, one of my favorite illustrators, Edward Gorey, brought the macabre story of an upper-crust family who mysteriously disappears one by one in typical Gorey fashion until only the youngest boy is left alive at a gazebo, nice and dark. Mr. Gorey also revisited the Tunnel book in 1984. This is a very rare title to get. If you ever see it, snap it right up. This Tunnel book is called The Tunnel Calamity, Edward Gorey, and it is indeed a nervous trip into the disturbing underbelly of humanity. Love it. That same year, the classic human body debuted with moving muscles and pumping blood vessels, perhaps inspired by the 17th century treatises or Philip's popular mannequin. I have to tell you that this is my mother's favorite pop-up book. You would think that one of my pop-up books would be one of her favorite pop-up books. No, this is her favorite pop-up book. Why is this her favorite pop-up book? She lives in Michigan and I live in New York, and whenever she has a pain, she calls me up and says, I have a pain. And I say, oh, you have a pain? Well, where's the pain? And she says, get the book. So I pull the book out and she says, go to the third page and open the thing, and it's down at the bottom, so then I know where the pain is from that pop-up book. Thanks a lot, Mom. This was followed by the equally stunning Facts of Life, which contains, even though in cross-section, the only known pop-up penis in publication. The royal family got into the act in 1984 with plenty of pomp and circumstance. And I love this book because it's fabulous and creepy, and sometimes books should be that way. And the best part is when you, wait, where's my little pointer? When you pull these tabs, down here at the bottom, they all do that royal wave. They go like that. It's great. Old friends have been visited. These are some of my old friends who I learned to read with, Frog and Toad. And old visitors have been brought back to life. Love it when a pop-up book can be used in the classroom. And where else but in Hollywood? Go figure. Can you make a pop-up piano actually play as time goes by? And this one really does by means of a small sound chip. Okay, so we're going to switch slide carousels here. That was my little brief history, and I'm going to show you how I work, how I came to be a paper engineer. I'm self-taught. I taught myself how to make pop-ups. There are a lot of books out available today on showing you how to make pop-ups, but I'm self-taught. And the tools that I use are very, very simple tools when I'm working. I never draw a pop-up in 2-dimension. I don't like draw it flat and then try to make it in 3D because I don't know if that will really work. So I begin to sketch in 3D right from the beginning. I use scissors and pencils and a ruler, and I just begin to cut out the cardstock. I work with white cardstock you can get from an office supply store. When I was a boy, there was no such thing. Growing up in Michigan, there was no such thing as cardstock that you could. Well, there was no such thing as Staples. I mean, none of those things existed, right? So my mother was a secretary at Ford Motor Company, and she worked in personnel. And they had a lot of those manila filing folders, you know, the folders that you put things in and like file things away. And she would bring home the folders from people who'd been fired at work. And then I would get to make them into pop-ups. It was great. But now I use cardstock. So I cut and fold. And this is actually the first rough pop-up for the Emerald City in Wizard of Oz. I'll end up making many different versions of this. I'll improve things, I'll switch things around. On the right is a rougher version, and I start to work on a more finished version here. Sometimes I'll make, I don't know, like 6 to 10 versions of one pop-up, just trying to get it to work. It's not so much that the pop-up pops up. You want it to be able to pop up and look great. It has to be able to pop shut over and over and over again. So that's the real challenge, is getting everything to cram back down on the inside. When I am working at the initial stages of designing a pop-up, I work exclusively in white. I don't put any color in the pop-up at all because I don't really want to be distracted by the illustrated surfaces. I just want to see the shapes, and I want to see how they sit on the page, and you know, what do the surfaces look like with lights and darks and shadows. So this is a more finished version. I start to add windows. This is, again, the main Emerald City spread from Wizard of Oz. Add windows, add doors, holes. I want the paper to really be like a sculpture on the 2 pages. I want to be able to look inside it, and I want to see what's happening from all different angles. So I continue to work in white until I have the one master version that works exactly the way that I want it to work. It opens, it closes, nothing sticks out from the sides when I shut it. It's ready to go to the next stage. Some of the engineering is pretty easy. Believe it or not, the one before was relatively easy. Then some of the engineering gets more complex. For the Emerald City, the balloon scene, I knew that I wanted to try to create a 3-dimensional balloon that would pop up. And that really hadn't been done before in this kind of a fashion. So I'm always sort of pushing the envelope when I'm designing a pop-up, and it doesn't always work. There are plenty of times when I fail. You know, I'll try something, and it's just not working, and hopefully that failure will just lead me to another direction so I can, you know, come up with a final solution. So this is a rough version for the balloon that the foolish wizard goes up to the sky in. A more finished version, again working in white. Here's the wizard and Dorothy and all of her friends. I need to make sure, and I work with other materials too. Like this is all made out of paper and no glue. There's no glue binding the balloon together. It's all interlocking. And string. I like to work with string and, you know, dowels. This is a wooden dowel here, and I use plastic dowels depending on the pop-up. The cyclone spins around on a plastic dowel, but wood dowels work better here. So whatever materials will make the pop-up work best, I'm interested in using. This is a very rough version for the tea party scene from Alice in Wonderland. Again, this is so rough. I mean, I'm just sketching in faces just to get an idea of where everyone's going to sit. And these teacups were the bane of my existence in this book. And of course my studio, they're always giving me a hard time at my studio. I have a studio in New York City that I work in. My partner and I do the same thing. And we have designers in the studio, and we have interns who work in the studio. And they're always busting my chops when I want to do something. So I said, for this scene, you know, I want it to be it's a tea party, so there's supposed to be teacups. And they're like, why can't you just make the teacups be artwork on the table? Why do they have to be like real 3-dimensional pop-up teacups? And I'm like, I'm Robert Sabuda. They have to be real teacups. So I spent weeks designing these little teacups so that they would stand up. I mean, I thought that this was going to be the challenging stuff in the back, but the teacups, they just took absolutely forever. I think I had a more finished version. Yeah, a little bit more finished version there. And these pieces, it's hard to see, but we have to number every single pop-up piece because a pop-up book will have, you know, 200, 300 separate pieces, including the pages. And if I were to lay all those pieces out on a table, it would look like roadkill. You know, I have to have numbers on things to determine where everything will go. So even every single part of the teacup, everything gets a number. So we know, you know, that one piece is that number. Me working on the final touches for the white spread for the tea party. And this is, I think this is the first spread from Alice in Wonderland. So after I get all of these refined, everything works perfectly just in white. I'll glue all these pages together. I'll glue them together, and these look like they're kind of glued together already down here. This is called a white dummy, and then I'll send that to the publisher. And the publisher will understand how the project's going and what it's going to look like, and they'll make comments, but I want to keep them in the loop from an early stage. So I'll actually make a book, a white book called The White Dummy, that will go to the publisher for them to comment on. So at this point, everything is still in white. There's no artwork for it. I mean, I'll have to create, I think the next shots are artwork for this. Oh no, die lines. We have to make die lines. So all the pop-up pieces have to have die lines made. What is a die line? Every single pop-up piece has to have a technical drawing made on the computer with just a black outline. Every single piece. This is the main tower for Emerald City, and this is made on the computer. So after I make the pop-up piece, I scan it into my computer, and we make a very fine, flat, black line. These are called die lines, and every single pop-up piece must have a die line made for it. The next stage is creating the artwork, the color artwork for the inside for a book like Alice in Wonderland or Wizard of Oz. When I was in college, I was a printmaker, and so I decided for Wizard of Oz, I would go back to my roots and use printmaking to create the black and white artwork. So I decided to use linoleum. I used to be a linoleum block printer, and these are the tools you use to print from linoleum. This is the linoleum down here. It's very soft. You can scoop it out. It's like potato printing. If you've ever potato printed, you cut a potato in half, cut out a shape, put ink and press it down. This is just a more complex version of that. There's the ink and my cutting tools. These are just the basic supplies to make a linoleum block print. The way this works is I make a drawing. This is a very tight final drawing for the witch from Wizard of Oz. She has a patch in the original book, and she lifts that patch and she can see really far away. Just an interesting note, in the original book, she doesn't have a broom. She has an umbrella, which sort of foreshadows what's going to happen with the water later in the story. So I make a very tight version of the witch, and then I transfer this drawing to the linoleum piece. I just transfer the piece, and then I begin to cut away areas of the linoleum. I'll cut away all the areas that I don't want to print. Everything that's raised, just like in a potato print, will print, and everything that is removed will remain white. So after I've scooped out all the linoleum, I rub black ink across the surface, across the top of the surface, and the witch starts to appear. I lay a piece of paper on top of it, very thin paper. It's so thin you can almost see the image coming through here. The reason why the paper is thin is I rub it with a wooden tool here and press the ink into the paper. I don't have a press in my studio which would be able to press really, really heavy on heavy paper, so I have to use thin paper, and I rub the wooden block around and around, and slowly on the opposite side I see the image sort of starting to appear. When I think I've rubbed enough, I pull it off of the block, and I have one piece of one side in black and white for the 300 pieces of The Wizard of Oz. All of the art on The Finished Witch. All of the artwork for a book like Wizard of Oz is created this way, including the front panels that have images of the scenes to come. Dorothy with her family at the beginning, in black and white only. Colors are chosen for a palette. We decided to add the color to this book digitally and make it look like it had been printed 100 years ago, so I had to come up with an appropriate technical palette. The black and white art is scanned into the computer, and then the color is added digitally to each piece. So we were really working in the 20th century and in the 15th century between the two techniques of block printing and computer. This was also much faster and gave me flexibility in the way I wanted the art to be colored. And you can see a version that's a little blurry here. Now that everything's in the computer, the die lines are here. This is actually from Alice. There are die lines here, and artwork appears underneath it. It's great to be able to put everything into the computer here, because then we can print this out in color, and I can build it, and I can see how it's going to look in color before the book is ever produced. The artwork for Alice is done a little bit different. It looks exactly the same, but I decided to try if I could go completely digital instead of just having to spend all it, because it took forever to cut all that linoleum and put the ink on and print it. It took forever to do that, so I thought there's got to be an easier way to do this. So this is a sketch for the jacket of Alice. You can see I sketch really rough. I'm a very rough sketcher. So I would take the sketch, it got approved from the publisher, and I would make a final drawing and scan that in my computer. It's still kind of rough, but I've got the drawing here scanned into my computer, and I'd use a computer program then to digitally sort of remove black. I would cover this with all black, digital black, and then I had a tool that I sort of scooped away all the white, just like linoleum block printing, until I got just a black and white version, just like Wizard of Oz. It was great. I cut it out and made the shape that I wanted to, and I could also correct mistakes easier this way, and then added all the color digitally as well. This is my, everyone know what that is up there? Yeah, that's the right answer, Krispy Kreme. Love Krispy Kreme. As a matter of fact, Krispy Kreme, the first Krispy Kreme in New York City is 2 doors down from our studio. every day that donut smell wafts in. It makes us crazy. For the final jacket, I'll color on the final jacket. The reason why Alice in Wonderland, I picked Alice, what I'm picking in my books. I always have to have a desire to want to do that book, or it was important to me as a child. I loved reading it. I loved the story. I loved the way my mother read it to me. I really liked Alice in Wonderland because most people say, oh, I'm sure you loved Alice in Wonderland because the language is so witty, so British. No, I love Alice in Wonderland because the adults are really mean to her in it. And when I was a kid, I thought that was great because they were like the Duchess digs her chin into Alice's shoulder, and everyone's just really, really, really mean to her, but at the end she's like triumphant. That's the first time that ever really occurred in a children's book. In children's books, like in the early 1800s, if a child was bad, at the end they like were reduced to being a beggar, or they froze in the snow or something. This is the first time that a child was ever triumphant in a children's story, and that definitely appealed to me. How do I pick the scenes? I thought this was a great scene where Alice cries so much that, like, she cries so much that she's swimming in her own tears. Like, that just was incredible. How could you cry that much that you would have to swim in a pool of your own tears? So I wanted to make sure that I included scenes that really affected me as a young reader in my version of it. So I would take this, I would use this as inspiration, do some rough, all this little dark here, some rough pieces for Alice swimming, some rough sketches, to finally come up with a version where Alice would actually, swim in the pop-up. Really big on action in pop-up books. I want things to happen, to spin or move or twist around or be enormous. Some of my other favorite scenes, the dunking of the dormouse in the pot of tea. I just thought that was great because they were all such crazy people. And I had no idea that this bandage around a person's head at that time meant you were crazy. When I was a boy, I just realized I wondered what that meant. And now as an adult, at that time, if you had a bandage wrapped around your head, it meant you were crazy. So of course I included that black and white version in 2 dimensions, and then finally the dunking of the mouse in the book. And there's also flocking on all these pieces. It's like a kind of a fuzzy thing because I'm really into tactile books, and I wanted, they have fur, and I wanted it to feel furry and seem furry. And then the infamous teacup scene, finally getting all those teacups to work out. And this I've come to, they tell me in my studio, they tell me everything in my studio, that I've come to discover that this is the look that I have on my face when they're making something that doesn't work. This is the Robert look. I'm like, that's right. Don't forget it. All right. And of course, at the very end, the big scene of cards. This was, in particular, a challenge in a pop-up book because when I'm designing pop-ups or thinking about a pop-up, pop-ups are usually objects. It's usually like a boat or a tree or a house. It's very hard to create like a verb in pop-up, or something like fog, or mist. That would be so hard. I'd like to think I could do that, but like to design something like that in pop-ups. So for this spread, it was so hard because it wasn't so much just cards. It was like creating like a whirlwind, like an arc, air making cards fly around. And pop-ups don't really work that way. They're really based on solid structures. So this took many, many weeks to design to make it look like there was no structure and that the cards were just whirling up into the air. And just as a small note, there are exactly 2 decks of cards represented here with all the proper faces and suits and everything, because what will happen is I'll go to some book signing and some 3rd grader will come up to me and say, there are too many jacks in there, there's not enough queens in there. So there's exactly 2 decks of cards in that pop-up. This is Manhattan where I live. It's my house right there. No, this is South America. For those of you who are hearing this for the first time, to your utter amazement, all pop-up books are made by hand. Somebody folds and glues every single piece into every single pop-up book that has ever existed. Machines are not used for that process. Since all that work needs to be done by hand, it's done overseas. Why is it not done in the United States? The United States has no history of hand assembly. In South America, I have slides of South America here, they've been manufacturing pop-up books for over 40 years. So they are masters at manufacturing pop-up and movable books. This is a shot from Ecuador. Pop-up books are made in Colombia, Ecuador, they're made in Asia, in Thailand, several different places in the world. And I have slides from different places too. So this is Ecuador and South America. This slide I included in here. Why is this slide in here, Robert Sabuda? This slide is in here because Robert Sabuda is a terrible photographer. This is the best photograph I have ever taken in my life. That is right. Thank you very much. The sad part about this photograph is it wasn't even intentional. I was just aiming the camera out the window to like see if it worked and hit the button and got that picture. But I love that picture, so I have to include it. So anyway, that's Ecuador. This is South America. There's a company in Ecuador called Mancal. Actually, they're a very small division of a much larger company called Carvajal. For those of you who collect pop-up books, you may, from the 70s, 80s, 90s, if you turn them over, it may say, made by Carvajal. Carvajal is in South America, and they have a very small division called Mancal. Mancal is a manufacturer of pop-up books. So I'll travel down to South America, and I'll go to the plant, and when I walk inside, this is what I see. Rows and rows and rows and rows and rows of people manufacturing pop-up books, putting them together by hand. This particular plant at Mancal has about 1,000 hand assemblers, I guess about 1,000 hand assemblers or 1,200, and they can make 10,000 books in a week. 10,000 books in a week. The process is pretty much the way you would expect. I mean, somebody takes a pop-up piece here and folds it or adds some glue to it and hands it to the next assembler on the end, and it will go all the way down to the very end of the table, and it'll be one pop-up in a book or one pop-up spread. But before any of this happens, before we get to all this complex stuff, a lot of preparation work has to begin between my studio and the plant down in South America. What happens is we were making die lines in our studio. We were making a die line of the Emerald City, that main tower. The die lines are sent down electronically to South America into their computers, and they print them out and check them out. I can see that these are die lines for Wizard of Oz. This is the lion's head. These are the scarecrow's legs. So they get an exact duplicate of all the die line drawings that we've made in New York City. This information in South America is fed into their computer, so they now have a computer copy of it as well. This particular computer is hooked up to a laser cutter. The laser cutter does not cut through paper or cut up the pop-ups. It cuts through a block of wood. It very slowly cuts through a block of wood about 1 inch thick. It follows the pattern of the die lines and very slowly cuts out shapes for each piece of the pop-up for the pop-up book. This is a finished small die for a pop-up book. You can see the areas that have been cut through. You can even see that it's been burned through. This is part of what will become a die. This large block of wood is then rolled into the die-making room, where thin strips of metal, they're very sharp at the top. You can see they're sharp because the guy cut himself here already. Very sharp at the top. They're put into a handheld vise. And then you take this handle here and you pound it back and forth to curve this metal. The purpose of curving this metal is to try to get the metal to match the same shape that's been burned into the block of wood. So this is also done by hand. So he takes the metal and he pounds it in the vise to shape it into the pop-up piece, and then he checks it to see if it fits, then he takes it back and he pounds it again to see if it tries to fit. And so when he finally gets everything to fit properly, everything's aligned, he pounds the whole thing down with that melt until just 1/4 inch is showing for one pop-up piece. So this is the sharp side of one little area for one little pop-up in the Wizard of Oz. After days and days and days of this, you get what is called a die mold. This is the dull side. This is the non-sharp side of the die mold. You can see each pop-up piece will have its own little area of the sharp metal. The sharp metal is on the other side. I think I even have a little close-up here. Let's see. This is from Christmas Alphabet because this is the ribbon. And you can see the metal, there's some areas that don't have metal, but the metal cuts almost all the way around the entire pop-up piece. Every single piece needs to have one of these small dies made. The pages, in the meantime, are printed. All the pop-ups and all the pages for the book are printed in traditional 4-color press. They're all ganged up onto one sheet to save paper. This is sheets from Alice in Wonderland. And let's see what else we got here. More sheets from Alice in Wonderland. Cards, teacups, close-up. And you can see how weird it is to do the work. Like, what is going on here? I mean, it looks like she got hit by a truck here. I don't know what's happening here. But all the artwork, they're all separate pieces. And then when they're combined, it'll make Alice's head and make Alice's neck and Alice's arms. And this gives us a chance. They'll print out the die lines initially first so we can make sure that all the die lines will align onto the pop-up pieces. All the numbers are still here. Everything is still accounted for before we move forward. On one end of a press, the die mold is placed. The die mold is put on one end of a press. The printed sheets, this is a printed sheet for cookie count. They're all brought into the same room, and they're stacked at the other end. And then one at a time, the die mold presses down onto one sheet of paper. Ker-chunk, ker-chunk. It goes through like a printing press. It just cuts through one solid sheet of paper, one at a time. But it goes pretty quick. Nearby is the Division of Preliminary Studies. This is a group of people who've been at the plant 10 years or more, and it's their job to make sure that my pop-ups are working, that everything is designed correctly, or we'll talk about ways to improve the hand assembly. This is the late, great Guillermo Holguin from Carvajal, Vice President. He travels down with me, and everyone discusses the best way to make the pop-up work. From the youngest worker at a table, I mean the person who's been at the table the shortest amount of time, all the way up to the vice president, everybody talks and comments about the best way to make all the pop-ups work. We'll have discussions in their library, a white version of Emerald City and a color version. There's Munchkin Land back there. It's very much a group effort when I'm there at the plant. Now, the sheets that have come off the die press are moved into the scrapping room because they don't fall out of the sheets. They're hanging on the sheets by chads. I love that I can use that word now in a presentation. They're hanging on by chads. So the pop-up pieces have to be removed from the sheets. This is done using rubber mallets and chisels. The pop-up pieces are forcibly removed from the sheets, 100 or 200 pieces at a time, because it's much faster to get everything removed this way than just pulling one piece of a pop-up away from the sheet. So this is a very, very quick method of removing all the pieces to get ready for hand assembly. For small areas, they'll use screwdrivers just to punch out windows and doors. And even the base pages of the book, these are from Wizard of Oz. These are also die cut and scrapped out as well for the final hand assembly to begin. Somebody counts all the pop-up pieces and wraps them in rubber bands. Can you imagine? That's somebody's job. So there's a whole room. It's like a library, and it's stacked, just stacked with all these different pop-up pieces, because they have to count them, because if you don't have the right number of pieces, you won't be able to manufacture the correct number of books. So the hand assembly begins. Like I said before, the first assembler here, he'll take up a piece of a pop-up and folder or glue it and put it into the book, hand it to the assembler on his right. It will go all the way down the end and become a finished pop-up. In South America, they prefer to use small bottles of glue. They use very thin bottles of glue for the pop-ups. This way, the assembler can put a dab of glue in the pop-up, fold it, and hand it to the next assembler without having to put the bottle of glue down. The process here looks like it's very, slow and meticulous, but this goes so fast. If you go to my website, I can't forget to mention that. You go to my website, robertsabuda.com, there's a video there. You can get a video of this process. The assembly is so fast here, you cannot imagine it. When I was down there shooting that video, the director said, okay, Robert, let's do something really fun. Why don't you sit in between two of the assemblers and we'll have you assemble with them on the line. And I was like, well, okay, I can do it. I'm Robert Sabuda. I designed this. I can do that. So I get around in between. The assemblers make room for me. And I sit down, and the director's like, okay, action. And so this assembler hands me the pop-up piece. And I start to, pick up the bottle of glue and fold it and unfold. And she hands me a second piece. And this one's waiting for my piece. It's like I Love Lucy. It's like in the candy factory. It starts to pile up here. And I was so embarrassed because I thought that I designed it and I should be able to do it. But they're so fast at this assembly. It's just astounding. Asia is such a brush culture, they prefer to use, even no matter how small the piece, they prefer to apply the glue with a brush. The pop-ups are glued into the pages, and then the pages themselves are all glued together. Somebody checks at the end of the line to make sure the pop-up will pop up. Quality control is at the end of each table. And then the glued together pages called signatures are stacked on end so that they can dry. The jackets are printed in another room. And even the actual signatures of the book being put into the covers, that is still done by hand. She has to put glue on this whole thing and then physically insert the book inside for it to be completed. Clamps are used to keep the book flat while it's drying. And the finished book is ready to go off to the bookstore or library. And that is the world of pop-up books. Thank you very much. All right, I know some of you want to have books signed, but I am going to take a few questions because I know no matter how much I cover here that there's always questions that people would like to ask. So it's open question period. Anything you would like to ask, please feel free at this time. How long does it take for Alice in Wonderland from initial concept to being completely done? It takes me in my studio, well, I'll give you a couple dates. It takes me in my studio almost a year from initial starting process with the manuscript for everything to leave my studio. And then it can be 6 months for manufacturing. So it's really from initial concept to the moment that you get it in your hand at the library, at the store, that can be up to a 2-year period. It can be a very, very long period. How old was I when I made my first pop-up book? How old do you think I was? How old are you? You're 9. Okay, that's pretty close. I was 8 when I made my first pop-up book. Her mouth like dropped open this wide. I was 8. Well, look, it's in my blood. I'm standing up here talking about it. I was about 8 years old. But you know what? I loved making books in general when I was a boy. I remember so clearly the first time my teacher took and I know it's a basic thing, but when you're a kid and you're really, really young, you don't know these things. I remember when my teacher first took paper, just like 3 sheets of paper, and folded it together and stapled it down the middle and said, here's a book, go draw something. I couldn't believe it. It was like a revelation. It was like actually a book. You could tell a story, you could put pictures in it. And for me, and for the other kids, that was enough. They could put the story in, they could put the illustrations in. But not for me. It was like a whole new world. Like one of my favorite things when I was a boy was scratch and sniff books. Remember scratch and sniff books? You scratch and you smell. Oh my God. I thought I died and gone to heaven when I got that for Christmas. So I made my mother immediately take me to the supermarket where I got those little brown bottles of imitation flavors like peppermint chocolate. And I ran back home and I poured little dots on the pieces of paper. And when I walked into school the next day with a scratch and sniff book, I was a god. It was unbelievable. Kids were amazed that it had happened. But I love non-traditional books and books that are fun and things that you can make. And a lot of that was definitely my teachers encouraging me to just keep going. Pop-up books are not the only books that I make. That's a very good question, thank you. If you have the opportunity to, if outside in the new beautiful cases in the new beautiful library that is the envy of the entire region here in Texas, you can see some of my picture book art. So picture book art is flat art, and I'm sure you have many picture books as well. So I do picture book art and I do pop-up book art as well. Why do I do 2 different kinds of work? I'm interested in different kinds of things. My whole life is being an artist. Like I try to tell my nieces who are 7, that's my job. Like my job is to be an artist. And one of the great things about being an artist is you can do lots of different kinds of things. And so for me in children's books, I get to do lots of different kinds of things. I can do pop-up books and I get to do picture books. Which is my favorite pop-up book? You know what? I really don't have a favorite pop-up book. I certainly feel more of an affinity to my most recent book that's coming out, like Dinosaurs is coming out in July, so we're totally dinosaur crazy right now. But books are sort of like your children, like the new one is really good and exciting, the others are okay, but you love them all. That's kind of sort of what it's like. How does the manuscript work? I have illustrated books for other authors, a few, not many for other authors, so the manuscript will come to me from my agent or my editor, and I'll read it and decide whether I want to illustrate it. I also write my own original stuff. There's artwork out there from St. Valentine and Tutankhamun's Gift. Those were original stories by me. And then sometimes for Alice in Wonderland and Wizard of Oz, those stories are so prominent in my childhood mind that I decided to not even adapt that language. I mean, that language is exactly the way it appears in the original novels, just in shorter versions because the novels are so much longer. So fortunately, manuscripts today come in a variety of flavors and colors and styles, just depending on the particular project that I'm working on. What was the first pop-up book I made? I have to tell you, the first pop-up book I made as a child was a version of The Wizard of Oz. And do you think my mother saved that? No, she was too busy with her pains and the other pop-up book. No, I'm just kidding. Was it hard to draw the detail in my books? You know what? I'm going to be truthful with you and tell you that being an artist is hard. It is definitely hard sometimes because it's not like someone is giving you a specific project and the answers are all right and wrong. When you're being an artist, you can do all different kinds of things, and some things are harder and some things are easier. But I like to think that as I get older, it gets a little bit easier. But some things are definitely hard for me. How about a scratch and sniff book, right? Wouldn't that be great? You know what? I'm gonna do a scratch and sniff book so bad that I like contacted the company that made those labels to see like all the different flavors they make. They make so many different scents on it. It's just, I have to do that at some point, but I have to be able to incorporate it like correctly into a book. You know, those books are so popular. The book that I had when I was a boy, it's like Little Bunny's Christmas. It is still in print today. You can still like walk into a store today and get that book right there. It's incredible. What kind of education do you need to become an artist? Well, I went to art school, I have to tell you. When I was in elementary school, when I was in middle school, when I was in high school, I took as many art classes as I could. And that was great, because then by the time I was a senior in high school, I knew that I wanted to be an artist, and I knew that I wanted to go to art college. My parents knew that too. And fortunately for me, I was a scholarship student, and it really helped a lot. I'm not gonna say you have to go to college to be an artist, because I don't think that that's necessarily the case, but for me, it helped. It helped a lot. It helped me a great deal. How hard was it to get my first book looked at and published? That's such a tough question, because it's a real Cinderella story. It's not even a fair. I'm glad I'm not trying to get into children's books today in 2005, because it would be much too difficult. But when I was in college, I did an internship at a children's book publishing house. When I graduated from college, I went to see an editor who was at that children's publishing house, who'd moved somewhere else, and she gave me a manuscript for my first picture book. So it was, but I had gone to art school. You know, my whole career at that time was to be a children's book illustrator. So it was not that difficult to get my first manuscript. And then that manuscript led to another one, and led to another one, and led to another one, and then I just started to build a career on top of that. The first children's book that was published was called The Wishing Well from 1988. And if you want it now, you have to go to eBay to get it. So thank you very much. I will meet you outside if you want to get books signed. I'm getting a gift. Go ahead.
For those of you who know people who could not make tonight's program, again, tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, and for those who couldn't make the two programs, the exhibit will run through July 10th in the gallery of the library. I want to thank, once again, the Friends of the Public Library, Allen Public Library, for sponsoring tonight's programs and tomorrow morning's program. And the best way you can do to thank a friend is to become a friend. And Carrie Riker, who has assumed the presidency of the Friends of the Allen Public Library, has a very special gift that's a little on the Texas side for our distinguished New York guest.
Yes. Look how big that box is. You know what's inside.
We wanted to thank Mr. Sabuda for coming tonight and sharing his wonderful secrets with us. And we wanted him to be able to take home a little bit of Texas with him. And so we let him choose, actually, his very own cowboy hat. You want to put it on for us?
Yeah. Oh, very good. See, I'm so not a Texan, I don't even know which way's the front. This way's the front on it, right? Yeah. Hey, right? Thank you very much. This is the first time anyone's ever given me a hat, and I'll treasure it. I'll see you outside.